Visions from childhood.
If you see somebody is different, they do not need to be told. They do not need it pointed out every single day, because everyone has told them their entire life that they're different. And I know you're just thinking, yeah, but it's just me. You think, yeah, but it's just you and 5 other people every single day forever. I've had that with my height forever and ever and ever, and felt incredibly self-conscious. And most people are perfectly nice. Some people are horrible. It's a really good radar for what people are like. I call it a C-word radar sometimes. This being different in any way, and perhaps you'll agree with, which is so many people are sort of lovely and chat, but then, a couple of times a day, there's just someone who wants to shout at you out of a window, or just wants to make you feel small, ironically. That's what they want to do. And you just think, why? Well, someone's a bit different to you, and you've got to shout something and make yourself feel a bit better. And so being different in any way whatsoever, I think really teaches you about people and about the hate that's out there and about the unhappiness that's out there, because that's where it all comes from.
I think you're cooler if you're weird, even if that means walking down the street, and if you want to walk in a zigzag, walk in a zigzag.
Acronym H.S.P. These are people that have a trait called sensory processing sensitivity. It's not a disorder, it's a trait or a series of traits, more along the lines of a temperament that they may be born with. But the person's nervous system is more highly attuned than other people, so that they literally absorb more information from the environment. They process much more information, notice details, and sometimes can become overwhelmed.
Minds are unusually open to expanded states of consciousness and have been this way from childhood. They have a fluidity in the way they talk about themselves and their experiences. Yes, they're a bit dreamy, but they describe unfolding life stories full of synchronicity, coincidences, and unexpected happiness. This was my first clue that the women live in a different world from me, a world that is far more magical and surprising.
For me, it's about how magic is present in everyday life in every moment if we're just aware of it.
Chili. Sally.
There can be that strange connection where you sense something's wrong with somebody from, 1,000 miles away or across the other side of the world.
Chili, no, what's wrong?
You call someone who's 3,000 miles away and you say, I was singing this song today, and they're like, oh my God, it's the same exact song I was playing and I was thinking of you. How do you explain those things where you can walk into a room and instantly fall in love with the person across the room and you've never met them before, but you've known them in some other way? It's all those practical little ways that we sort of negate all the time, but we use instinctually.
It's no different than a kind of magic when you're in love with someone and you know what they're going to say before they say it. It's, again, this practical approach to these kind of extraordinary things that really are all around us.
We sort of don't like to analyze it too much, but they are magical and they're a gift that have been given to us, and the movie celebrates that.
Have you ever touched a plant and known exactly what it was for? Or dreamt of symbols that you've never studied? Or stepped into a forest and felt watched, not like in fear, but more like in recognition? That is ancestral recall. Because for some, the craft isn't a path that we picked. It's a legacy that is buried in the bone, a spell cast generations ago that finally reached you. In Slavic lore, it was said that the forest whispered its secrets to those whose grandmothers once fed the trees. And in African diaspora, spiritual gifts were often passed through the blood, not by teaching, but by activation. And even in Celtic traditions, they believed that the earth would call back her witches through dreams, illness, or sudden knowing. So if your rituals come from instinct and not instruction, if you have been called without a label, answer anyway, because maybe you aren't starting a path. Maybe you're finally remembering that you have, in fact, walked.
Adams lived in colonial-era Jericho, during a time when being different basically meant you were burned at the stake. If you so much as owned a cat or gave someone a side-eye, you'd be labeled a witch. So imagine how well things went over when Goody Adams showed up, an outcast with supernatural abilities. Goody was part of a bloodline of outcasts who were born with what the series calls psychic abilities.
In a world in which we live in, and we're still struggling with, people all over the world feeling like they don't belong, or they're outcasts, or they have to hide something because it's not the norm, it's not what's accepted. I think we're all in a world that we understand that. And so to live in the Addams family world, in the world of Wednesday, where it's okay to feel like that. In fact, you're not normal unless you do feel that. It's good because it's a sense of belonging. It's a sense of okay to be different. It's not okay to be different. It's wonderful to be different. And I think a generational, the demographic of the show and the world connects to that.
Yeah, it's not about the pressures of trying to fit in. It's just accepting who you are. And who you are is beautiful.
Integrity would be the one in walking in your fullest expression of self. And I know that can be a very corny thing or new age terminology, but you have to just be yourself and not be afraid of not hiding parts of yourself because you're afraid of the judgment of others. Yeah. Because when you're there, what people feel with the unconditional love is because they are no longer judged. And it's just a relief. And they're able to finally be themselves. That alone is walking in accordance to the way that the true nature of reality is. And so when you could start doing that here, right, you don't end up blocking yourself up, like distorting your own energy, blocking your field, creating distortions. And therefore those distortions creates illnesses within the body. A lot of people have a lot of illnesses within the body that typically has nothing to do with the sickness or the disease, but it has to do with blocking the field. Their field is being blocked by holding on to things. Like it's as above, so below, as within, so without. And this is why you could get your old grandmother that lives to 105 that drank liquor every single night because she was truly happy in peace in her fullest soul expression. She was in joy. And you could have the person that is focused on all of the newest health things, cleaning themselves, and they die when they're 35 years old. So it's when you contain and restrict the flow of your energy, you're also restricting that very life force, which is your soul, which is to fuel the body that you're within.
Family to me, where your nuances and your idiosyncrasies are embraced. They're not pushed down, quashed, boxed away, and hidden. We embrace that. And hey, we're still trying to break glass ceilings and all that stuff today, but I think that the acceptance of the Addams family with their children and within the outcast world, it means a lot. We all feel like we're all been a little removed and detached from certain situations in our life. And this is like applauds and encourages that to be just the norm, and everybody else is different.
In today's world, we're all taught to be a certain way, to fit into some sort of normal mold, which realistically doesn't exist. We should be celebrated for our differences. Our differences are what make us unique. And I hope that this school and this show can represent that and push that message out to the world, because honestly, what makes you unique is what makes you human, and I wouldn't want to live in a world where we're all the same.
Happy to be celebrating it. The message of Nevermore is to just embrace who you are and find your community, and I think that's a wonderful thing. And I definitely needed that as a kid, so I hope it speaks to young kids.
It's why people really connect with the show, with the character of Wednesday, with the concept of outcasts. And it's really important to have characters like that, especially.
I think for a lot of young people, that's something that they really grapple with. Have you got any advice for those people in that situation?
It's just going to take breaking the shell, really, isn't it? So it goes back to what I said already. Why is someone cooped up in a shell? It's typically, actually, it's 100% all the time because they're afraid of what others think, the judgment side of things.
Yeah.
100% of the time. So if you could just get in a space where you just don't care. This is what it's like on the other side too. Like it's almost like no one cares to judge you for you being yourself. This is why I said before, this is why people have so much relief in NDEs. It's just, oh my God, finally, I don't have to be that person because you were pretending the whole time. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
It's when you could just finally let go of the pretending. You could even play a game with yourself, right? Let's just say your truest expression of self is so far out there for other people that you have to pretend that you're acting. Then do that. Say, oh, I'm just going to act today. and you're going to act like whatever your truest version of self. And then you play it like a game, and then you start to be more fulfilled because then you can finally break that shell. And then that acting, pretending to be the version that you are always, but you're saying to other people you're acting, just then that comes to the forefront and becomes your everyday living experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's useful.
Yeah.
Did you go through that process yourself? I can imagine being a young person having the experiences that you were having there. Probably no one else around was having those same experiences. Yeah. Did you go through that phase yourself, or did you get to a point where like, this is me, this is what's happening with me, and I don't care what anyone else thinks?
No, I've never really cared, to be honest with you. I would share it with some people, but I never really had that up near because it's like, for instance, like I was so attuned to the other side as a child, where it was like, where I said, I really don't care what people think, is because even when, for instance, when I was in school, I had a teacher saying, oh, you have to do this homework. And I knew all this was absolute bullshit. I was like, I have a question. Why do I have to do this when I don't have to do it on the other side? I don't have to do this in heaven. So why do I have to do it here? I said, this is pointless. It's not actually, what does this lead to? And so I was always doing things like that. I was always aware and always attuned to that, to the other side. And where typically all kids are always attuned to that, it's like they shut it down due to pure pressure of, oh, it's weird. And they shut it down. And this is where it goes into, as a child, when you're growing up, that's the very first signs of suppressing your uniqueness and putting it in a bubble and containing it and locking it away. And you have some kids that just don't do that, and they're considered rebels. You know, I'm a proud rebel because I will always and forever continue to be my authentic version of self.
Because they had always been open, permeable to a larger unseen reality beyond this material world. This quality of being sensitive to other realities appears in children, but in our culture is discouraged. Even very young children know not to speak of such things, since if they do, adults will squash their experience, explain it away, or give advice like, just ignore it. One of the underground guides told me, when I was little, I thought I could talk to trees. Then later I was told, no, you can't talk to trees. I never mentioned it again, and now, of course, I know I can talk to trees. Our culture doesn't take seriously what children say, especially when their comments don't fit our materialistic concept of reality. It's possible that the women guides have been silenced from the very beginning of their lives. Other cultures don't silence their children in the same way. A colleague of Hart's, psychologist Kaisa Puaka, wrote about an authentic way of knowing developed from her childhood experiences that involved a merging of knower and known. With adult reflection, she said, these experiences were the major mileposts on my spiritual journey. After reviewing hundreds of first-person reports from adults remembering their childhood spiritual experiences, psychologist Michael Piofsky concluded that these experiences are often the foundation for the unfolding of a person's spiritual development throughout life. It almost seems fated that Albert Hofmann, the researcher who first synthesized LSD in 1938, also had such an experience in his childhood. In LSD, My Problem Child, Hoffman wrote, one enchantment of that kind, which I experienced in childhood, has remained remarkably vivid in my memory ever since. It happened on a May morning, as I strolled through the freshly green woods filled with birdsong and lit up by the morning sun. All at once, everything appeared in an uncommonly clear light. It shone with the most beautiful radiance, speaking to the heart, as though it wanted to encompass me in its majesty. I was filled with an indescribable sensation of joy, oneness, and blissful security. These experiences shaped the main outlines of my worldview and convinced me of the existence of a miraculous, powerful, unfathomable reality that was hidden from everyday sight. Pioneering psychologist Gordon Allport, one of the first to study personality, described the openness to spiritual experience as the portion of personality that arises at the core of life and is directed toward the infinite. It is the region of mental life that has the longest range intentions, and for this reason is capable of conferring marked integration upon personality, engendering meaning and peace in the face of the tragedy and confusion of life. Such statements regarding the long-lasting and integrative influence of spiritual experiences are reminiscent of the Johns Hopkins questions from their psilocybin studies. After their entheogen experience, subjects were asked, "How personally meaningful was the experience? Indicate the degree to which the experience was spiritually significant to you. Do you believe that the experience and your contemplation of that experience have led to a change in your current sense of personal well-being or life satisfaction?" Research subjects consistently reported that their psilocybin experience was one of the 5 most personally meaningful and most spiritually significant experiences of their lives, which is similar to how people describe the lifelong impact of early spiritual experience. I recently did an autobiographical exercise that built on the central role of spiritual experiences throughout a lifetime, starting with childhood. I wrote down every mystical, numinous experience I've had over the course of my life. Looking over the list, I realized these experiences told a personal story quite different from my outworn narrative of all the traumas and abuses I've experienced, mostly from men. I think the latter is precisely the kind of story that my dear friend Connie Grouse was referring to when she yelled at me in my friend's kitchen, "We don't even want to hear about it." Questions describing childhood spiritual experience. Researchers Peter Nelson and Tobin Hart developed a questionnaire for adults to reflect on any memories they might have of spiritual experiences from childhood. These 21 questions cover a wide swath of possibilities, and they help to clarify the range of experiences children have had. 1. Have you ever had the experience of receiving guidance from some source that is not part of our usual physical world? 2. Have you ever encountered a time in your life, either precipitated by crisis or good times, which led you to adopt a new or different spiritual practice? 3. Have you ever experienced a personal crisis which led to questioning your very identity, only to have this process lead you to a new and profound awareness? 4. Do you feel that you have ever been directly aware of or influenced by the presence of God? 5. Have you ever had an accident and, at the moment it was happening, someone or something seemed to appear from nowhere and intervene to help you? 6. Have you ever had memories that felt like they were about you, but at the same time seemed to be about someone else of a different time and place? 7. Do the presences and or feelings of others seem to enter into you without any verbal or physical contact, as if you are a receiver and they are transmitters? 8. Have you ever had an experience during a life-threatening event, such as an accident, major surgery, or other physical trauma, in which you had an intense experience of a non-ordinary light or darkness, and or experienced meeting deceased loved ones or other disincarnate beings in non-physical form? 9. Have you ever seen, physically felt, smelled, or heard something or somebody that you realized in retrospect was not really there in the same way as ordinary everyday objects, people, and events? 10. Have you ever felt a presence of someone who was not there in a physical way? 11. Have you ever had a vivid experience of flying to a remote location without any physical means, and or have you had the experience of actually seeing your physical body from a perspective outside of yourself? 12. Do you ever feel at times you know about events before they happen, and or you know about past events without having heard or read of them, but later learn they actually happened? 13. Do you ever feel that at times you know people's thoughts or feelings unusually accurately without being told or shown in any direct physical way? 14. As a child, did you have times when you experienced life as an illusion and unreal, but one in which most people, including grown-ups, seemed to be caught up? Perhaps it appeared to be like a play in which everyone was just acting but didn't know it. 15. Have you ever found yourself knowing and or saying something that seemed to come through you rather than from you, expressing a wisdom you don't feel you usually have? 16. Have you ever felt as though you were very close to a powerful spiritual force that seemed to lift you out of or take you beyond your ordinary self? 17. Have you ever had an intense experience of attaining union with the cosmic, divine, or ultimate ground of being in which you felt yourself dissolve or merge with the ultimate, and after which you felt as though the encounter had changed your life? 18. Have you ever had an experience in which you perceived that all was really connected together as one? 19. Do you sometimes feel a sense of awe and wonderment inspired by the immediate world around you? 20. Do you sometimes purposely tune in to a special quality of the world that seems to underlie everything around us? 21. While awake, have you ever suddenly been cast into a strange new world or reality which had a vividness that made the whole experience appear to be absolutely real, although in retrospect, you realize that the entire episode may not have physically happened? Remember, these are questions adults were asked about their childhood spiritual experiences. They could just as easily be questions asked of someone after a psychedelic journey. Did you tune in to a special quality in the world, have extrasensory perception, or encounter beings other than human? Because our culture doesn't pay attention to children who report such experiences, these questions may appear exotic or fantastical, but they are the norm for the women guides I interviewed, and these childhood experiences may have foreshadowed their affinity for expanded states of consciousness via entheogens. The guides remember their childhoods. A similar distant look came over a number of the guides when describing an elder woman in their family who was connected to the other ways of being. Even though each story was unique, there was something in the nonverbal descriptions of their experiences that signaled a connection with mystery. Somehow, these elder women in their families held a door open to other worlds, unseen vistas. As children, the guides recognized that these family elders were important to them above and beyond whatever the relationship was. It's almost as if the older women planted a seed in the guides as children that eventually opened and grew at a later time in life. The women I interviewed reflected back on these early influences as affirmations of their early spiritual experiences. Usually, this kind of energetic transmission was nonverbal, but a few women described more specific influences. My maternal great-grandmother, a tall black woman, was a witch, Medrith explained. Her lineage was clearly along matriarchal lines. Medrith proudly told me how her mother kept a garden and was very connected to her plants, and said she always felt different. Feeling alone in childhood emerged as a theme among the women guides. They felt set apart from their peers and the regular world from a very early age. Maureen said, I grew up outdoors. That's where I found solace. And she described her experiences of being at one with things. Everything I do now is based in nature. Maureen trained with a Native American medicine man. Things sometimes have a way of working out perfectly, especially when there's help from the other side. People seem to find each other. Another guide, Janet, described a different type of experience from her adolescence. I was out late one night on my first psychedelic experience and got caught driving in a blinding snowstorm. I saw, heard, and felt God takes care of his children and made it safely home. Later, my mother told me, I had the strangest dream. You were out in the night and in danger, but then I heard a voice say, God takes care of his children. I knew you'd be all right. These examples are not exactly numinous experiences, but rather describe spiritual influences. Another guide, Rose, reported a clearly spiritual experience. I had my first spiritual opening at age 6. As a teen, I already knew there was so much more than this state of consciousness. I was a lone wolf, heard my own celestial music, was meditative and quiet. My first medicine experience was in nature, got opened up to the great mystery, awesome beauty of nature, always sacred. I was uncomfortable with recreational use, like it was a fix. Rose's adolescence was in the 60s in Los Angeles, a period famous for teenagers experimenting with psychedelics, so Rose's spiritual path was already far from the madding crowd. Ariel is very clear about the connection between her childhood spiritual experiences and her life's work. I had a rich inner world as a child, and it's connected to my adult life and work. Here's the best description of a young child's experience of journeying. I was aware of other realms, called it going out the window at night. I had access to other worlds in my dreams, not a fantasy. Never had conversations about it until now. Hadn't thought about it until you asked. By age 7, Ariel had a new phrase to describe her journeying, going up past the clouds. She told me, I encountered huge beings, like Greek gods and goddesses, robed, fully formed, and transparent. They were sitting around a table playing a game like chess and laughing, playing chess by moving people around on Earth. I got up there a few times and flew around, observing. Very real dream. Seemed natural to me to travel. In those dreams, other states, that felt like the real world. Being there felt real. I was in a heightened state of awareness. I felt very alive. I belonged there. I was better suited for that world than this. I never told anyone. I don't know if these experiences were actual night dreams or meanderings during that hypnagogic state right before one falls totally asleep. As a child, Ariel might not have made such a concrete distinction between being asleep and awake. Ariel described a long-ranging pattern of numinous experiences, not just a few outstanding moments of peak experiences, and said she moved fluidly between this world and other worlds as a child. I learned to navigate in expanded states of consciousness back then. I use these same skills now to teach the next generation working with psychedelic studies. Speaking to Ariel helped me clarify my differences with these women guides. I had spiritual experiences as a child, but certainly not a pattern of intentionally returning again and again to expanded states, of moving between worlds with such ease and familiarity. Ariel also said, I never needed a belief system because I had an inner knowing that came from my own experiences. This shift in Ariel, from her dreamy description of other realities during childhood to a very concrete matter-of-factness, reflects the ease with which she moves between states of being. Her boundaries between worlds are remarkably permeable, and yet she, and many of the guides, has a demanding career that requires strong executive skills, planning, organizing, strategizing. It's almost as if they can code switch between states of being, living in both worlds, consensual reality amid invisible realms. Later spiritual initiations, becoming a psychedelic guide. As the psychedelic renaissance explodes, the need for guides and therapists is rising exponentially. Training programs are proliferating that are sponsored by academic institutions, nonprofits, and profit-making businesses. This chapter turns to the histories of the underground elders, exploring the personal qualities and experiences that enabled them to learn how to accompany people through psychedelic realms. Virtually all of the underground women guides I interviewed went through an apprenticeship with luminaries in the psychedelic world, such as Stan Groff, Ralph Messner, or Leo Zeff, better known as the Secret Chief. Almost half the women apprenticed with indigenous healers from Native American tribes or the Amazon basin. Of the 3 who had been working for only 10 years, 2 are still studying with a Peruvian shaman, and the 3rd claims that the mushrooms are teaching her. The latter woman also studied with an array of subtle energy teachers, but not in an apprenticeship, putting her in a totally different category, experienced but not apprenticed. An apprenticeship is not a training, no matter how long the training might be. An apprenticeship is of a whole different order. It's literally sitting at the elbow of an acknowledged elder, learning the craft or art by being present, osmosing the subtle skills to work with energy in the moment. Anthropologist Francis Huxley apprenticed with a Brazilian healer and described the intimacy necessary for the process of transmission. You have to get their way of seeing into your own system. This characterizes the implicit learning that takes place when the student is in the teacher's energy field as the teacher works. Radha, a woman guide who trained for many years in the jungle with a Peruvian shaman, described how she learned to sing the Icaros, healing songs. Her teacher, a powerful shaman, would sing, and I would sing a nanosecond behind him, she said. She reflected on the kind of synchronicity that arises during this kind of energetic learning process. The relationship between student and teacher happens on multiple dimensions. She described how she dreamed of the tree one of her apprentices was dieting on, while at the same time her student did a painting of it. There's a subtle merging of images as guides accompany their students through entheogenic realms and track their progress. The teacher tunes in to the student, and the student learns to resonate with the teacher, and information is transmitted non-verbally through this attunement. Our culture lacks the deep understanding of this embedded approach to learning. Our current use of the term mentor in the business world has been reduced to meeting once a week with a boss. Even the leading psychedelic-assisted therapies and research certificate program at the California Institute of Integral Studies describes the mentorship aspect of their training this way. The mentors meet with a small group of mentees regularly and once individually during the program. The program's use of the term mentor is more closely related to networking than to an apprenticeship model. Our trainees have access to experts in the psychedelic field and in-depth mentoring that enables them to create professional connections not otherwise available among the influencers in this arena. Admittedly, this is a training program and not an apprenticeship, and they are ramping up to meet the field's rapidly growing demand for psychedelic therapists by training 1,125 graduates over the next 3 years. My point is that the psychedelic field needs to make the distinction between how the newly hatched psychedelic therapists are being trained and how the elder guides learned in apprenticeships. Other cultures at other times possessed a traditional concept of apprenticeship. For example, consider the rug dyers in 12th century Turkey. Their apprenticeship went on for 15 years, and based on their life expectancy, this was at least half their time on Earth. In addition, in order to become a master dyer, the student had to create a color that no one had ever seen before. This seems like a magical request from a fairy tale, yet it illustrates the high standards expected from an apprenticeship. I recently asked an Academy Award-winning documentary director whether she had a mentor or apprenticeship experience. No, she reflected, but I mentored other people. She then described how she worked with a 25-year-old woman for over 15 years, helped her become a producer in her own right, and then supported her decision to have a child in her early 40s. She emphasized that the relationship was about more than the young woman's career. I considered her a friend of the family. She did my daughter's makeup when they went to proms, and I understood how important it was for her to have a baby. The apprenticeship relationship goes way beyond work or career. An apprenticeship is more like an adoption, a familial relationship. For the elder, it's an opportunity to pass on their teachings and practical skills to the next generation. Too often, the elder's biological family members are not interested in the old ways, so the elder adopts someone from outside the family. In 2 instances I know, Indigenous elders asked their adopted students to promise to teach any of their family members who might show an interest after the elder passed on. In another case, a dying shaman gave his shamanic power objects to his godson, who, in turn, promised to pass them on to any of the old shaman's biological offspring should they decide to enter into training. Both the teacher and student invest enormous amounts of time and energy into the relationship, years and years. The underground guides reported apprenticeships lasting from 7 to 15 to 25 years. This doesn't mean that the apprentice didn't begin to work on her own at some point, but this was always, at the beginning, under the eye of the teacher. One woman reported being reprimanded early on by her teacher for offering a combination of medicines she hadn't yet experienced herself. This was evidently a serious misstep. She was told she couldn't guide anyone for 12 months, and she accepted this consequence. Often, the initial meeting of elder and student is a synchronous event, meaning there's a match between outer world circumstances and the inner world readiness of the student. Connie Grouds, a dear friend and not one of the underground guides, described her experience of an apprenticeship to Don Antonio, a Peruvian shaman who didn't read or write. They didn't speak the same language. The apprenticeship consisted, she said, of her following, living, resting in hammocks, sharing meals. The process was osmosis. Knowledge washed through me to deliver to the modern world. This she has done in a myriad of books and presentations. Don Antonio asked Connie whether she really wanted to apprentice. "It will kill you," he said, "make you crazy or heal you." She understood the risks from the very beginning. He told her, "My job is to take you to the spirit doctors and bring you back safely." Don Antonio saw his role as a gatekeeper, and ayahuasca was the gate. You have to maintain these practices to be pure and fine-tuned in order to communicate with the spirit doctors. After Connie had lived like a monk in the jungle for 5 years, the spirit doctors finally began to talk to her. A number of the women elders worked with both Stan Groff and Ralph Metzner. Angelus Arian, coming from a Basque tradition, was a teacher for a few of the underground guides. The eldest of the elders, Medrith, is still seen as a teacher for some of the guides, although she prefers to think of these relationships as part of a sacred sisterhood. What it means to be an apprentice. One of the guides was formally adopted into a Native American family of traditional medicine peoples. Her training included peyote ceremonies and focused on ritual, ceremony, prayers, pipe smoke, herbs, nature, and elemental forces. It was quite rigorous and intended to become a way of life. Her full training extended over an 8 to 10 year time period. This was a sacred adoption, the relationship continuing into the present, years after her grandfather's death. When she first began this training, she said, "I said yes before I knew what I was saying yes to." She was initiated into a different way of life with rituals, restrictions, and practices that had to be followed on a daily basis. As I listened to her examples, such as ways to work with the elements and tend a fire. All the women underground guides have stories of dedication, discipline, and deprivation in their trainings. Most of them do not have children, and so they have been free to dedicate their lives to their own healing and subsequent training. There is a belief that you follow your destiny or you die. These women had the strength and courage to follow their destiny before they fully understood the entire path. They had faith in their own unfolding. This is the essence of a journey, whether an entheogenic, time-limited ceremony or a lifelong destiny. These apprenticeships are about learning how to navigate expanded states of consciousness, to guide journeys, and to clear and cleanse energy. Adopting an apprentice. Maureen adopted her apprentice after helping her recover from 2 near-death experiences. They are a match. Both are fearless about working with many medicines at high doses, and both are dedicated to their journeys. An apprenticeship is a familial relationship, not merely a mentorship. Trust the process. The therapist must know the effects of any such drugs in themselves before giving them to anyone else. I would extend this to say that psychedelic therapists should not work with people unless they're experienced with the same medicine the client has taken. Each entheogen has a unique signature and opens portals into different realms. The therapist has to be personally familiar with these territories. Here's how Zev states the same axiom. You cannot trip and work with a therapist who hasn't tripped and get any value out of it. You can't relate back and forth. In the Stolaroff book, The Secret Chief, Zev described another approach to trusting the process in the exact moment during a journey when things get really scary. Look at what you're afraid of. Just look at it. Don't do anything about it. Just look at it. Keep looking at it and just tell me what you experience when you're looking at it. This seems like a simple suggestion, but there's a complexity inherent in his message. The advice translates to, don't resist, but that wording would not be helpful. First of all, it's much harder to stop doing something, to stop resisting, when we've already begun to spiral down into fear. Zev's suggestion instead redirects the person's attention to something they can do. Just look. Second, notice how Zev repeats the word just in his suggestion. When I was apprenticed in the Rolf movement work called structural awareness, my teacher was very precise about her use of language to evoke movement. She would say, just take a breath up through the top of your head. Just move your knee forward. Just stretch your arm up. When I asked her about this repetition, she explained, I'm asking for ease of movement without effort, without trying hard. The teaching was about more than one specific movement. It was about learning to be in your body in a gentle way, about moving from the inside, rather than following outside orders. As Zev said, just look. It's that simple. Nothing more is required. Then he said, just tell me about it. Easy. Now the person is lifted out of their experience to connect with a guide and put their experience into words. Zev knew in his bones, from both his personal journeys as well as his work guiding others, that his suggestion would change the way things were going. Zev said, I had them live with it and stay with it until it became transformed. The suggestion to trust the process is still standard advice that's often repeated by modern guides in harm reduction tents at concerts and psychedelic gatherings. Float downstream. It is not dying. Surrender to the void. It is shining. Which is one of the main reasons guides need to be experienced with whatever medicines they serve. The psychedelic amplifies all kinds of insights and feelings, so that many voyages are, Groff writes, able to tune in to the inner feelings of the sitters with great accuracy. The ability of the subjects to read the therapist correctly was truly striking and seemed to border on genuine extrasensory perception. In other words, the guide cannot hide who they are. They have to be authentically present. And they have to have had their own experiences with the medicines they serve in order to sustain equanimity in the face of existential challenges like fear of death, total loss of control, and the specter of insanity, Groff wrote. If not, the voyager will see right through them and realize they are alone and adrift in uncharted waters. For instance, if the guide tends toward anxiety or fear, the journeyer is likely to catch it like a virus. There's a loosening of the boundary between client and guide, so they easily pick up on one another, whether they're intending to or not. In the delicate state mid-journey, there are inevitably enough challenging moments, without the client being contaminated by the guide's emotional state. Groff expanded on why the sitter's personal development is critically important. Unless the therapist deals successfully with these existential issues, the manifestations of the deep unconscious of the patient will tend to activate her own problem areas and trigger difficult emotional and psychosomatic responses. If the guide's unresolved issues are stimulated in a session, this can cloud the experience and exhaust the energy required to rise to challenges in either person. Anne Shulgin gave me the same message with a slight variation. The therapist must have done work on her own shadow. She must know her own territory in order for the journeyer to trust the guide 100%. If not, you can do damage. If the traveler is somewhere you haven't been, it becomes obvious that the therapist doesn't really understand. You can't fool around about this. It's the work of the soul. The only way to learn how to guide is to be guided by an experienced guide, and so we arrive full circle at the necessity of a long apprenticeship, not a training, whether over months or a year, whether in person or virtual. An adoption is what's needed, an accompaniment through unknown territories on low and very high doses with all of the entheogens. And the women underground guides have done just this, not with the expressed intention to become a guide, but to heal themselves. They originally dove into deep waters in search of their own healing, with just enough desperation to be willing to tolerate the long years and challenging trips of an apprenticeship. Heal thyself first. Back in the late 60s at the Esalen Institute, the common refrain was, "You can't take someone where you haven't been." This translated as, "Work on yourself first." Or as Maureen puts it, "No one skips dismemberment, disintegration. This is what creates space. All my old ways didn't work. Everything I knew didn't work." Searching for their own healing fueled the elder guides' personal searches, eventually leading to entheogenic journeys. As a group, they have histories of childhood abuse and trauma, spiritual emergency, great loss, addictions, and serious medical conditions. The quest for personal healing is not the same as yearning for the spiritual experiences they had as children, but they are related. Childhood suffering often opens doors in consciousness through dissociation during abuse when children learn to leave their bodies for their own survival. Aliana told me that grandmother ayahuasca said to her in a ceremony, "You were trained for this from a child. We protected your spirit." Many of the women guides described how healing continues over a lifetime. It's not like they did a few ceremonies and now are healed. Their process of healing is the story of their lives. They are healers because they continue to work on their own healing. This is a characteristic of these women elders that I think is overlooked when training psychedelic therapists. One of the guides was shocked to learn that not all therapists have had their own therapy. But no, that's not the case, and I don't know how many, if any, of the psychedelic therapy training programs require it. The underground guides have different ways of describing how healing continues over a lifetime. One said, people grow in tiers, layers, where they encounter another level of understanding and spiritual access. It's a process of continuous unfolding. Rose described how healing themes unfold over time like a spiral. Issues return at another level as they come up for healing. Mary said how her cup of healing was filled up during her many years of apprenticeship, and this was after decades of trainings in energy and family systems work. With an anthropologist's perspective, Cedar talked about the process of initiations occurring over a lifetime with the traditional 3 stages. 1. Dissolution, disrepair, coming apart, separation from what was known before. 2. Limbo, liminal stage, ordeals, challenges, requiring perseverance. 3. Integration, movement into new level or status, contribution to the community. A numinous experience should be left untouched, honored, and respected from afar. It has its own way of working through a person, healing and changing them as the experience deepens and moves through their inner life. This is why a psychedelic guide or therapist has to have their own experiences in these other realms, inner and outer, to know when to sit in silence and just be present to the whole mysterious unfolding. Fearlessness in the face of danger. Like Ariel, most of the women elder guides are remarkably fearless in pursuit of their own healing, their apprenticeships, and their work with others. Personally, I'm racked with fear, and this alone is probably the greatest difference between the guides and me. Accordingly, I've been fascinated by fearlessness. In a New Yorker magazine profile of 2 famous rock climbers, they both agreed that they don't have an emotional reaction to danger. The risk of injury and death doesn't seem to frighten them. They see it, calculate it into their plans, but don't have the baggage of an emotional reaction. Neither do the women elders. I think of the underground guides as spiritual warriors in the tradition of Tibetan Buddhism. This doesn't mean they're all enlightened or even psychologically sophisticated, but they are remarkably one-pointed in their life's work with entheogens. Fear does not stop them. Ethical, and unstoppable. The ability to be present. In practice, most of the time, the guide's job is to be present, to hold a safe container for the journey. Jamie Beachy, director of the Center for Contemplative Chaplaincy at Naropa University, does the best job describing being present. Presence, for me, is about being connected to something that is broader than myself. So when I bring my presence, I'm also meditating something greater than myself. The guide's commitment is to be in the service of the journeyer. This means paying attention with an open, receptive focus. I have heard of guides sitting nearby, available and yet immersed in a book. I don't think this qualifies as the kind of presence I'm suggesting. Some guides write down whatever the client says or does during the journey, and those notes can be powerful clues for the integration process. The guide needs to be grounded in her own body in order to focus on the person in front of her. She has to sift through what she's picking up directly in her felt bodily sense and differentiate what belongs to her client and what's hers. She has to recognize and manage her own projections so the client has a free, open psychic space without interference. The guide can then work with a dual awareness of the journeyer. She senses into their experience even with minimal clues and, at the same time, attends to her own bodily felt sense of being in the moment. Both aspects of this dual awareness are nonverbal. If the guide has her own inner chatter going on, that will interfere with her awareness, both inner and outer. The concept of presence also arises in anthropology when Westerners encounter indigenous elders who demand more of them than they're normally called upon to find within themselves. In 1992, Petra Rethman lived with a reindeer herding brigade in the northern tundra of the Kamchatka Peninsula, and she studied with Shura Shishkin, a woman she called grandmother. This indigenous elder was not impressed with an anthropological study and demanded more of Rethman. Now, in hindsight, I think that all Shura Shishkin was asking of me was to be present. And to do that, I had to let go of the anxiety and desperation, of my discomfiture, of my shame, of the stories I was telling myself about myself. This was what it meant to be in the present. Being present requires an inner quiet and spaciousness in order to be receptive to any signals, intuitions, or guidance from unseen sources. Experience with one's own interiority in a range of expanded states allows the guide to feel into the client's journey. The more experienced the guide is with the entheogenic landscape, the more likely she'll recognize where her client is in their journey. As the guide attunes to the person in front of her, she can match what she's perceiving with her own inner experiences. This enables the guide to speak and act with the authority of someone who's been there, especially when there is an exotic psychic locale. It's been reported that some shamans can see into the ayahuasca-fueled visions of their patients, and even enter into these visions. Westerners trained by indigenous shamans report seeing dragons, snakes, and other mythic creatures in their clients' bodies. One shaman told me after a ceremony that my head was clear, but my torso was dark, and that was well before my abdominal surgery and year of dismemberment. For Western guides, it seems that cultivating a dual awareness is a more realistic goal than seeing such creatures. The guide has to intuitively know when to say or do something, and when to remain attentive and receptive. It can be challenging to resist the urge to help in some way when what's called for is non-doing, just being present. Harder still is knowing when action is appropriate and not for the sake of making the guide less anxious. The guide needs to know how to be centered and grounded, how to manage her own thoughts and feelings so she doesn't project them onto the client. Asking, "What's happening now?" too often can interfere with the journeyer's experience. No client wants to pause an ecstatic moment to try to find the words to reassure an inexperienced guide. Guidance from unseen others. All of the women underground guides reported receiving guidance from unseen sources, plant teachers, ancestors, angels, and unknown entities that were experienced as autonomous, intelligent, and intentional. Some of the elders referred to their intuition or inner healing intelligences, but there was little distinction between an inner source of guidance and an outer source or entity. It is more like their inner intuition enables them to receive information from an outer, unseen source. The psychedelic elders talked about this guidance in different ways, but the message is consistent. They receive help, information, downloads, instructions from an unseen source. Cedar explained, "I received direction from the spirits. The spirits told me to give my people grounding food after the ceremony. Nuts, cheese, dark chocolate, fresh or dry fruit, or warm soup, to welcome them home." In my interview with Janet, we spent over an hour talking about her psychotherapy and psychedelic training. She had traveled to the Netherlands for a legal immersion experience with psilocybin truffles. She said she was in a small group with other therapists in what she described as an ideal situation. This was a very interesting story, but she told it without the passion and commitment I'd heard from other elders. I was polite and slightly bored. Then Janet said that the psychedelic therapist training she's had in the States doesn't prepare you to hold space no matter what, the way her years of specialized trauma therapist training and practice have. From there, she somehow segued into, "I grow San Pedro here where I live." The San Pedro cactus contains mescaline, like peyote, and my notes have a line drawn across the page at this point, indicating that everything shifted. Janet came alive with the depth of her love for this plant, and I heard all the passion and commitment I was used to hearing in the other elders. Evidently, the cactus is Janet's medicine, though I found out later that she also has a close relationship with mushrooms. At this point in the interview, we were talking on a whole different level about San Pedro. She said, "We all have spirit helpers, whether we're aware of them or not." Medrith described a slightly different perspective. "I work intuitively. I just know. And the knowing is very playful. We're all in the garden together." Medrith has the kind of joy that comes from a secure childhood filled with love. She didn't have childhood spiritual experiences to report when I asked about her early years, but she described a neighborhood where no one locked their doors, and she could ask anyone on the street if she needed help. As a therapist, I couldn't help but wonder if this was complete denial or partial whitewashing. Medrith grew up in a large metropolitan area, though it was quite a while ago. She was remembering a childhood in the 30s. With my usual therapeutic pessimism, I listened for inconsistencies in her story, but there were none. She said, "On my first trip with Ibogaine, I saw 50 to 20 of my ancestors, some clearly visible and some in shadows. They continue to support me. I can call on them for support." On another trip with the same medicine, Medrith asked, "How did I get here, working with the plants?" On that journey, she described watching the film of her life. "I saw a tall woman, my maternal great-grandmother, who was a witch." This woman is also part of Medrith's ancestral support team. It's more than age that makes Medrith the eldest of the elders. She has a wisdom that has grown from this safe, loving childhood, embedded in an extended family and community.